Okay everybody, in the last video we got the player apocalypse hooked up and working, but there's still one other part of the apocalypse system we need to also hook up. That is the enemy apocalypse system. The player apocalypse function is meant to handle damage being done to the player. It's the fun one that causes all the crazy stuff to happen when the player gets hit, like 69 times damage and all that. The enemy apocalypse function is meant to handle damage being done to enemies by the player. The purpose of the enemy apocalypse function isn't as glamorous as the player apocalypse function. It's mainly used to keep track of some stats like damage being done by the player, but it also features a very juicy hack known as the Kamehameha hack, which basically provides the player with a 1 in 5,000 chance of causing extreme damage, up to 10,000 times damage, which is always fun. I like RNG. I like when the RNG is weighted against me in terms of the enemy, but I also like cashing in on big with a nice juicy payout if we're really lucky. And it's pretty fun to score that Kamehameha on the bad guys. That Kamehameha will then be reported to the stream up above in that event log window when it happens. So the first step to implementing the enemy apocalypse is very similar to the first step to implementing the player apocalypse. We have to find out where the damage is being calculated prior to it being applied to the health of the enemy, as opposed to the player this time. Now in some games, it's done in the same place. The damage being done to the player, it also uses that same function of code to calculate damage being done to the enemy. In some games, it's in wildly different areas. Monster Hunter World, for example, is in completely different areas. Implementing the enemy apocalypse was quite a pain in the Monster Hunter World game because the code that handled the damage being done to enemies was a code that was constantly being pulled, like every single millisecond. And most of the time the damage being done to them would be 0 because they're not getting hit. But sometimes it wasn't. Very annoying to debug that kind of thing. But let's be optimistic here and let's see if the code that processes the player damage is the same place we process the enemy damage. I'm gonna wire up a breakpoint to the player apocalypse hook here. Put a breakpoint there. I'm gonna whack them, and I wanna see if that breakpoint goes off when I whack them. Okay, as we can see here, the game is paused right before I whacked one of them. And it looks like the same function of code is responsible for handling damage being done to enemies. So how are we gonna filter that out? Because I need to know when the enemy's getting damaged or I'm getting damaged. Well, it looks at the health right here, and if you can remember, the OmniPlayer health hook sources the health from the RCX register. So all we need to do is we need to look at this RCX register here, and we just need to compare it against our player's own base health structure and see if they equal. So we can see here the player's health structure is this address right there, which is notably different than this address. If they're not equal, then we call the enemy apocalypse function. So this makes this a lot easier for us. So let's go ahead and implement that enemy apocalypse function. The majority of that code is game neutral. All we have to do is wire into it and pass the proper parameters. Let's do that right now. Here we got the code for where we initiate the player apocalypse. Well, since this is going to be the same place we initiate the enemy apocalypse, let's just do some renaming here real quick. This initiates the apocalypse. We're going to rename this from Omnified Player Apocalypse Hook to Omnified Apocalypse Hook. And let's rename this as well, from Initiate a Player Apocalypse to Initiate Apocalypse. Now we have to filter out the target of the damage. So the target health struct of the thing getting hurt here is going to be in the RCX register. Let's just document that here. So here's the beginning of the apocalypse initiation function, and this is where we're just backing up all the variables or registers onto the stack so we can screw around with them. So here is where we're going to do the filtering, where we figure out whether the enemy is getting fucked with or the player. So let's move the code that we have down here, where we're prepping the player's health for being passed to the player apocalypse function. Let's move it up here. We got it moved up here. RBX will contain the address of the player's health structure. So the enemy apocalypse function has the same return values as the player apocalypse. So let's see if we can't have some common code that processes the return of both player and enemy. So I'm going to actually move this down here, and we're going to implement the enemy apocalypse right here. Initiate enemy apocalypse. For the code that handles the return values, we'll just give it my typical cleanup code or exit function name, which is initiate apocalypse exit. So when the player apocalypse is done being executed here, it jumps to the exit and reads the return values, cleans up the stack. Here's going to be the initiate enemy apocalypse. So when we're comparing the target health struct with the player struct here, if it's not equal, then we're going to jump to the initiate enemy apocalypse. So here we need to prepare the parameters to call the enemy apocalypse function. So what parameters does the enemy apocalypse function take? It is actually far simpler than the player apocalypse function. Let's take a look at it and also copy it over to our Sekiro file. Here's the enemy apocalypse system function as defined in my common library of assembly functions for Omnified stuff. Looks like it only takes two parameters here. And that is the damage being done and the current health of what's being hurt. So let's copy this over to the Sekiro code. We'll copy that over and place it right underneath the player apocalypse. There we go. And then let's copy up the cleanup code as well. Here's the cleanup code. We'll paste that underneath the player apocalypse cleanup code. All right, that has now been transplanted into our code. All right, so we got the function transplanted into our Sekiro file. Let's call it. So the first parameter is the damage amount, and then the second is the target health value. That's very similar to what the first two parameters of the player apocalypse code is. So let's see if we can't commonalize that code as well, so we only have to do it once. So here's where we're preparing the damage being done for the player apocalypse, and this is us grabbing the current health value of the player here to pass to the player apocalypse. We can actually do this before, and we should be able to take these same values and use them for both the player and enemy apocalypse functions. So let's move these two statements here up a bit. We're going to place them before the comparison is being made as to whether the target health is the player or not. There we go. This does the two complement on the damage being done and then converts it to a floating point. And then this also converts the target's current health and converts that to a floating point as well. Then the comparison's being made. And we already have these two SSE registers set up and ready to be passed to whatever function we need to be calling. So to call the enemy apocalypse here, first we need to pass the damage being done to the character. And it'll look just like we do it for the player apocalypse. We're going to make room for 8 bytes on the stack. We're going to move to the stack the damage being done, which is currently stored in that SSE register. Then we're going to make room for 8 more bytes and move to the stack the current health of the target, which is stored in the XMM1 register. And that's all we have to do. Now we can just call execute enemy apocalypse, and that's it. This will then process the return values of that, and everything should work. Fabulous. The only remaining part of the enemy apocalypse to port over from our common function library is the display logic that will display the various stats that the enemy apocalypse tracks, and as well as the logic that displays when a Kamehameha happens. Don't forget, we will have a separate video that's completely dedicated to showing you how these apocalypse functions work and what they do. So we won't go into too much detail here. Let's just wire up the display logic and so that all the stats will be shown on the stream, and so that the Kamehameha will be shown. We're gonna do that right now. All right, we got the enemy apocalypse function hooked up, the display logic wired up. So let's do some damage to an enemy and see if the statistics are correctly compiled in the stats section to the upper left. All right, hit that guy right there. Let's see if it updated. Now you guys can see it in the upper left-hand corner. I can't too well. Let's see. Looks like Yes, we did 80 damage to the enemy. This shows the last amount of damage, and then it shows the maximum damage done by the player for the session, and then the total damage. And then also, this also shows us the health of the enemy, which is nice for games where it doesn't tell you the health. The enemy has 240 remaining. Of course, with Sekiro, we have to take into account poise, or whatever it's called in this game, I can't remember. We'll have support for all that kind of thing later, which is about getting these basic omnification systems in place. So for all those who are curious what the Kamehameha looks like, I have it rigged up so the Kamehameha will happen. Let's hit a guy and see what happens. Ooh, they got fucked up. So you can see in the event log, it says that the player has unlocked his inner Goku and performed a devastating Kamehameha, causing 10,000 times extra damage. Very neat. Another feature offered by the enemy apocalypse system is it adds the system of player crits. Let's see what that looks like if I crit an enemy. There we go, we got a crit. And after the crit chance is rolled and the player has been shown to get a crit, it randomizes how much damage it'll actually do. I think it's anywhere between 2 to 4 times damage, I'm not sure. But it's reported to the stream here. You should see up above, says a player critically hit the damage for 208 damage. Well, that's the enemy apocalypse function, and with that implemented, that's the full apocalypse function implemented for Sekiro. Didn't take any time at all because the majority of the code is game neutral. Again, we'll have some videos that are dedicated just to going over my game neutral systems, and you can expect some videos like that uploaded someday. But thank you for watching the video. Don't forget, once this is fully omnified, we'll be playing it on my stream, twitch.tv/omni. You should give that stream a follow now. And subscribe to this channel if you like what you're seeing. There's gonna be tons more, baby. And leave a comment, any questions, just say hi, I don't care. Also join my Discord server, say hi in there. Any way you can support me, it's greatly appreciated. I'll see you guys next time.